Naomi first arrived at the mansion under the solitary glow of a half-moon. She parked at the entrance, gravel crunching under the tires, and wondered if she'd made an unwise decision. The sprawling edifice looked half devoured by time, its once imposing facade chipped and rotted. Still, she couldn't bring herself to turn around. This place had belonged to her maternal great-uncle, a man she had never met, but who had always been spoken of in hushed, nervous tones by her family. That alone intrigued her. Something in her gut warned her to flee, but she pushed through the warped front door instead, stepping into a musty foyer that reeked of old paper and something unpleasantly sweet. Her first night in the house was uneasy. The single bedroom she'd chosen had a crooked, sagging bed and a heavy mahogany wardrobe that seemed far too large for the small space. She barely slept, kept alert by the creaks and groans of the building around her. The wood floors squeaked as if footsteps roamed freely, yet nobody appeared beneath the thin slit of light under her door. Her dreams, if she slept at all, were a feverish tumble of voices she couldn't quite isolate. When she awoke sweating, it felt as though everything within the mansion was pressing in on her from all sides. She lit a candle and sat up, listening. For several moments she heard a soft cacophony echoing through the walls. Whispers, sobs, a mocking laugh. She didn't dare investigate. Instead, she remained in bed, heart pounding, until the rays of dawn freed her from the suffocating night. Desperate to rationalize the early morning chills, Naomi told herself that old houses moan and shift. Wind can produce almost any sound when filtered through rotting boards. She rose, feeling stiff from the thin mattress, and decided she'd better explore. She had come to assess the property, see if it was worth restoring, or if she should sell it as is. The thought of selling felt like betrayal, but the mansion's condition was bleak, and she had her own life to think about. Nonetheless, she wanted to see what was here before she made any decisions. The long hallway beyond the foyer branched into multiple corridors, some blocked with debris from collapsed ceilings. Each step brought new discoveries of peeling wallpaper, dusty wooden furniture with missing legs, and shattered glass from defunct chandeliers. At one point, she noticed a series of large portraits hung askew on a heavily water-damaged wall. A tall, severe-looking woman in a high-collared dress glared from the largest painting. She glanced at the plaque beneath it. Eudora Ravenswood, 1874. The woman's eyes seemed to follow Naomi no matter where she moved. She felt a vague pressure in her temple, like a shiver of disquiet, and resolved to move on. As she walked, Naomi found herself following a faint mumble, barely audible beyond the patter of dripping water. She paused, straining her ears. That's when she first heard them clearly. Multiple voices, layered over each other, blending. Some whispered her name as if beckoning. Others giggled as though sharing a bleak private joke. A colder whisper accused her of trespassing. She spun around, searching hallways and corners for people. The air was still. No living being graced the corridor besides herself. She forced a laugh to break the tension. "Get it together," she whispered, then approached the next door. It was locked, but with a forceful push, the rotted wood gave way. Inside was a cramped study with mismatched bookshelves and a single flickering light bulb that somehow still received electricity. Naomi's gaze fell on an imposing leather-bound ledger lying on a desk. She flipped its cover open to reveal rows of names, dates written neatly beside each. The columns read like a register of births and deaths. Curious, she leaned closer. The final entry dated to 5 weeks ago. It listed a name she recognized. Her great-uncle, Horace Glenn. A sense of unease rushed through her like ice water. Beside his death date was a short scribble. "He sees us. He joins us." Naomi snapped the book shut, startled by the squeak of leather binding. The overhead bulb flickered, casting frantic shadows that shifted on the walls like dancing silhouettes. She jolted away from the table, knocking the ledger to the floor. Its pages fanned out, revealing more lines of names she didn't have time to read. She forced herself to slow her breathing, then picked up the ledger and carefully placed it back on the desk. Instead of leaving, she stood there, alone with her racing heart, half expecting to hear voices again. Fighting the eerie dread that tried to root her to the spot, she made her way out of the study and into the corridor once more. It was quieter now, almost still. Seeking fresh air, Naomi navigated back to the front foyer, then stepped outside. Her shoulders relaxed as the late morning sun bathed her in warmth. She told herself that she needed a break. She climbed into her car, drove a few miles into the small town, and found a local diner. Nursing a coffee at a corner table, she felt breath returning normally to her. After her hands stopped shaking, she couldn't help but turn her thoughts back to the voices, the ledger, and that cryptic note. He sees us, he joins us. What were Horace Glenn's final days like in that mansion? She soon discovered the answer might be closer at hand than she realized. The elderly waitress, Mildred, recognized her immediately as the new Glenn occupant. Over the hum of the diner's chatter, Mildred offered a few words about the mansion. "I hear it's always been a strange place," she said, fiddling with a pen. "Folks in town say it's got, how do they put it, an echo of time. Visitors claim they hear voices, see figures at the windows. My mother used to say that house holds every memory of anyone who's ever stepped inside." Naomi watched Mildred's expression dim with unease. "Why would it do that?" "Ghosts, some say," Mildred answered quietly. "Spirits trapped. It's just talk, but most folks prefer to keep their distance." She paused, seeming to gauge Naomi's resolve. "If I were you, I'd do the same." Instead of feeling convinced, Naomi's inquisitiveness only grew. She returned to the estate by midday, mustered her courage, and started exploring the east wing. The dust-heaped corridor seemed to darken around her, and an itching alarm traveled across her skin. She felt eyes on her, but whenever she whipped her head around, no one was there. She soon discovered a hidden staircase behind a false panel. Without hesitation, she climbed upward. On the second floor, in a corridor painted with a faded floral design, she spotted a child's footprints in the dust, too fresh to be decades old. They led to an open door at the end of the hallway. She peered in. Light from a narrow window illuminated a nursery decorated in an outdated, once cheerful pattern of farm animals. A tiny rocking chair sat in the corner. Depressing the floor's squeaky boards, Naomi edged closer, and that's when she heard the distinct sound of the rocker swaying. She couldn't see it move, but the squeaking was unmistakable. A child's voice giggled from the corner. She caught her breath and stared, but saw only shadows. The giggling grew louder, layering with other voices that now joined in. One cried, another hissed, "She's not one of us." Pounding filled her ears, and she backed away, nearly stumbling over a loose board. With a ragged inhale, she ran out of the nursery, back down the hidden staircase. Her pulse hammered. She steadied herself by leaning against the wall, pressing her forehead to the cool wood. The voices gradually receded, but the memory stuck like tar. She needed to figure out the truth. Were these paranormal events, or was she succumbing to the mansion's oppressive atmosphere? Later that evening, after the sun sank behind twisted pine trees, Naomi found herself in what used to be a formal parlor. She set up a small recording device, convinced that if the mansion truly swarmed with spirits, technology might capture evidence of them. She turned on the voice recorder, placed it on a table near a dust-caked piano, then asked slowly, "Is anyone here?" Silence hovered thickly in response, but she felt that heavy presence again, like the hush after a lightning strike. She asked again, "Who are you?" At first only emptiness. Then a quiet rustle, so soft she almost missed it. A faint moan, elusive as wind. Gooseflesh prickled her arms. Subconsciously, her breathing quickened. She tried a more direct question. "Do you want me here?" A scraping noise came from the far corner of the parlor. She glanced over but saw nothing. Something told her that would be enough. She clicked off the device, forcing her shaky hands to remain steady. Tomorrow she'd listen to the recording. Tonight, she was too unnerved. Instead of returning to that condemned bedroom on the ground floor, she decided to hole up in the library. The library's thick wooden door was the sturdiest in the mansion, and she felt a strange comfort among rows of old books. She placed her sleeping bag on the floor near a battered couch, a reading lamp flickering overhead. A thorough search revealed no secret doors, no trap doors in the floor, only dusty shelves and a locked cabinet stuffed with antique manuscripts. Setting an alarm on her phone, she hoped she'd sleep better in the library's confines. Yet that hope dissolved as soon as darkness overtook the house. Just past midnight, she roused from a shallow doze to the sensation of something pulling at her hair. A childlike voice whimpered right behind her ear, and she nearly yelped. Darting up, she saw no one. Candlelight flickered widely, sending grotesque shadows along the ceiling's ornate molding. The voice sounded again, this time from the corner. She doesn't belong here. Only the dim shape of a tall, moth-eaten curtain filled the corner. Next, footsteps pounded overhead, as if a crowd of people marched across the second-floor hallway. Her lungs felt too tight to draw air. Suddenly, from the other side of the library door, came a series of frantic knocks. She froze, hard in her throat. The knocking became sharper, rattling the doorknob. Slowly she rose, nearly tripping on her sleeping bag. "Who's there?" she called. The handle twisted, but the door did not open. She reached for the handle herself, gripping it in trembling fingers. For a moment she hesitated. Then she yanked the door open. No one waited in the hallway. The corridor stretched out in darkness, illuminated only by the faint light from the library. But the knocking persisted, echoing as if it came from within the walls. Multiple knuckles drummed from every direction. Horror twisted her stomach. She slammed the door shut and backed away, pressing her hands over her ears. The knocking eventually ceased, replaced by a low morning hum. With dawn came some reprieve. The incessant voices receded into a dull murmur, leaving Naomi haunted by fatigue. Over lukewarm instant coffee in the library, she thought of calling someone, an expert ghost hunter, or at least a friend, but she worried they'd dismiss her as hysterical. And maybe she was. Maybe she was hearing imaginary voices. Yet the experiences felt more vivid than any dream. She decided to stay, determined to unravel the mansion's secrets. She spent the morning searching for diaries or letters, anything to confirm that past occupants experienced the same phenomenon. Eventually, in a small trunk hidden behind a rotted chaise lounge, she found her great-uncle's journal. It covered the final months of his life in disjointed entries. "The voices are strongest at night," read one entry. "They celebrate, mourn, and condemn in turns. I can scarcely sleep. They know me on an intimate level. They whisper secrets from my childhood I'd nearly forgotten." Another entry revealed even darker thoughts. "I am losing my sense of self. They chant in unison sometimes, telling me to become part of them. Perhaps I already am." Naomi's lips parted in alarm. It seemed that in his final journal entry, her great-uncle had accepted his fate. "I see them in the mirrors now. Their eyes are hungry to join with me. I will let them. I cannot fight it anymore." Shaking, Naomi closed the journal. She tried to imagine him, alone in these shadow-clogged rooms, losing his grip. In a perverse way, she could relate. She'd only been here 2 days, and already the house was twisting her thoughts. She returned to the parlor to listen to the recording she'd made the previous night. Pressing the playback button on her phone, she allowed the file to run. At first she heard only herself asking the questions. "Is anyone here?" Silence. Then, so faint it was nearly inaudible, "Yes." Naomi froze, goosebumps crawling up her arms. She rewound and turned the volume higher. It was indeed a whisper, answering her question, toneless and heartbreakingly soft. Her next question played, "Who are you?" Again silence, until a rush of static erupted and mingled with half-formed syllables. She thought she recognized help in there, or maybe her mind was filling in the blanks. Her third question, "Do you want me here?" The static vanished. Then came a hiss, like air escaping from the walls. A voice emerged, layered over itself in a piercing, distant tone. "Stay with us. See what we see." Naomi's heart pounded. She remembered the note in the ledger. "He sees us. He joins us." The voice on the recording seemed to echo that desire. Questions hammered through her mind. Could the mansion genuinely contain echoes of the dead? Could these voices be illusions conjured by stress? She didn't have the answers, and that terrified her. She spent the rest of the day in a restless state, pacing the corridors, occasionally calling out, I can hear you. Sometimes she heard a scuttling noise in the walls, or faint whispers in response. If she addressed them directly, the whispering retreated as if the ghosts, if that's what they were, didn't want a direct confrontation. By late afternoon, fatigue weighed on her, and she considered driving into town again to sleep in a motel. But a fierce determination refused to let her abandon this puzzle. Instead, she forced herself to eat a sandwich she'd packed and resolved to venture into the West Wing, where a section of the mansion remained closed off due to structural damage. Perhaps something there would give her closure, or at the very least an explanation. Navigating fallen beams and collapsed walls, she came across a grand but ruined ballroom. A portion of the ceiling had caved in, forming a jagged hole that admitted angled sunlight. Once this space must have been resplendent with shining floors and elegant drapery. Now it was a graveyard of shattered marble tiles. As her boots crunched debris, she heard faint strains of music, as though an old waltz played in the distance. The battered remains of a large chandelier swayed overhead, and from beyond the rubble, voices lilted in melodic conversation. She felt her pulse spike. There was no one here but her yet. The echo of a grand party lingered. She advanced slowly, glimpsing shimmering shapes out of the corners of her eyes. Women in swirling gowns, men in formal attire, they danced across the broken floor, intangible illusions that flickered in the dusty light. Her rational mind insisted she was hallucinating. Still, the illusions felt so real she found herself stepping aside to avoid collisions with ghostly dancers. She could almost smell perfume and candle wax, almost hear champagne glasses clinking. Then, as quickly as they appeared, the phantoms vanished. The music cut off. The air thickened around her, growing silent and oppressive. At that moment, an echo rang out from the next room. She followed it, pushing aside a broken door and stepping into a smaller chamber. A swirl of dust motes danced in a single bright beam of sunlight. She paused, noticing a large cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. Its silver backing was corroded, forming black patches. Hesitant, she approached. Her reflection wavered in the dusty glass. Then shapes began to appear behind her. Shapes of men, women, and children, their eyes glowing with a distant, forlorn intensity. She whipped around, but saw only empty air. Looking back at the mirror, however, she realized they were all still there, behind her reflection, watching. Wispy images of the dead, each distinct. A little boy with half his face hidden behind a tattered hat. A middle-aged man with hollow cheeks. An old woman brandishing a walking stick. They crowded together, mouths moving in silent pleas. Naomi felt tears burning her eyes, a sudden wave of sorrow crumpling her resolve. She had to tear herself away. Her reflection followed her exit from the mirror's line of sight, but the silent watchers remained. She backed into the corridor, physically shaking. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, voice cracking. A low chorus of whispers reverberated, resonant enough that she could feel it thrumming in her bones. The urgent words overlapped. "Join us. Listen, end our waiting." The corridor's walls nearly vibrated with them. Naomi realized each voice belonged to someone who had lived and died in this mansion. Nightmarish visions of centuries of inhabitants flickered through her mind, each leaving an echo behind. She felt pinned, as though if she stayed any longer, she would become one of those echoes too. The pragmatic part of her said to run, but her curiosity, her sympathy, anchored her. She asked, "Why are you trapped?" The voices receded, as though even in their desperation, they didn't quite know. Finally, a single voice spoke distinctly in her head. An older man's voice with a crack to it. "The house keeps us, but you must leave before you are kept too." Torn between fear and compassion, Naomi tried to glean more. "Is there a way to free you?" Her only answer was faint sobbing. The presence hovering over the mansion seemed to shift, as if the unseen watchers retreated to corners. An overwhelming sadness enveloped Naomi, but also a desire to help them, even if she had no idea how. She stumbled through the corridors until she returned to the foyer. Her thoughts were a storm. Stay and help, or heed the warning and leave. The air tightened around her, like the house itself was deciding her fate. The voices rose again, not demanding, but pleading. She thought of her great-uncle, writing those final lines of surrender in his journal. He had stayed and lost himself. If she lingered, the same might happen to her. Yet she couldn't walk away without some sense of resolution. Grabbing a handful of matches, she made for the library. A plan, wild and unformed, turned in her head. She gathered old diaries, fragile books, loose papers, anything she could find that once belonged to the countless inhabitants. She lugged them into the foyer, creating a small stack. She suspected these remnants might anchor the restless souls. A symbolic purge, perhaps, could set them free. A foolish notion? Possibly, but in her exhaustion and heartbreak, it seemed worth a try. She crouched before the mound of relics, struck a match, and waited for the flame to catch. Pages curled and blackened, then crumbled to flakes of ash. As the stack burned, the house trembled. The walls moaned with overlapping cries. It felt as though the entire structure was crying out. Naomi's eyes watered from smoke, but she stayed put, cradling a fire extinguisher in case the flames spread. The roar of the voices escalated in layers, a chaotic storm of anguish, anger, and relief all at once. She felt them pass through her, jolting her with an electric chill that made her gasp. Then, as swiftly as it began, the voices dimmed to a hum, fading until the house fell silent. For a few heartbeats, she knelt there on the foyer floor, waiting. The only sound was her ragged breathing and the crackle of flames licking the last scraps of paper. She sensed that something fundamental had shifted, like a centuries-old tension had loosened. Was that it? Had she somehow broken the cycle? Numb and exhausted, Naomi finally extinguished the flames. Smoke drifted into the rafters, carrying ashes with it. Outside, the sun had descended into early evening, painting the sky in hues of purple and red. Slowly, Naomi walked to the front door and stepped onto the porch. A light breeze touched her cheeks. She listened closely, half expecting the voices to resume, but the mansion behind her was eerily calm. Eventually, she ventured back in, fear nestled in her stomach. She didn't sense any watchers in the hallways, no tapping on the doors or shuffling footsteps overhead. Deciding she needed one final confirmation, she passed by the mirror in the west wing. Only her own reflection met her eyes, no ghostly figures looming behind. Worn out and trembling, she felt both relief and profound sorrow. Where had they gone? She remembered the old man's whisper, "The house keeps us, but you must leave before you are kept too." Perhaps by destroying the tangible traces connecting them, she had released them. Or perhaps they had simply gone silent. Either way, she realized that whatever had happened, it was the right time to go. Gathering her few belongings, Naomi left the mansion. She briefly glanced over her shoulder at the rotted towers and shuttered windows. For the first time, the place looked truly empty, like a stage after the final performance. The ghosts of every actor dissipated. The drive back to town felt unreal. Her eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see shapes trailing her. The road was empty, the night sky dotted with stars. At the diner, she checked in with Mildred, though she offered few details of what transpired, just that she didn't plan to stay at the mansion anymore. The elderly waitress nodded sympathetically, as though she already knew. Naomi made a promise to herself that she would never return, that she would take whatever steps needed to rid herself of the property. Whether she sold it or had it demolished, she couldn't keep a place so hungry for its inhabitants. There were things in this world beyond understanding, she realized. A tapestry of echoes lingering in abandoned spaces. She had glimpsed that tapestry and nearly become woven into it herself. That night, in the safety of a motel room, she slept a dreamless sleep. When morning came, the recollection of voices was already fading like an echo in her mind. Though she knew it would never fully dissolve, some impressions remained forever imprinted on a person's soul. She felt a strange peace, tinged with an undercurrent of unshakable unease. Perhaps the voices had found release, at least from the prison of that mansion's walls. As for Naomi, she carried them in her memories, an unquiet reminder that the living and the dead are not always separate, that sometimes, in the corridors of a rotting old house, time folds inward, capturing voices that still demand to be heard.